Welcome to the Left Behind podcast. My name is Zachary Fuller. Today we've got a great guest on, Justin Glawe, an independent journalist who's going to talk to us about some problems with the Board of Elections in Spalding County. He wrote a whole article in The Guardian about it, as well as a piece about one of the members in the Daily Beast. Those will be linked down below. First, I would like to tell everybody about February 8th. So it's going to be in 4 days, but if you are watching this and live in Spalding County or the surrounding area, the Spalding County Board of Elections is having a meeting that day at the Spalding County Annex Building in downtown Griffin at 6 p.m. Last year, they got rid of Sunday voting under the guise of SB 202 and HB 769. This is a violation of voting rights because historically, for black churches, they have Souls to the Polls, which is where church groups will go and vote on Sundays so that they feel better protected, because a lot of times black people are harassed while voting. Stripping Sunday voting and not allowing people to vote on Sunday is a big voter suppression push against a specific group of people, black people. And so one of the Democratic members has put bringing back Sunday voting on the agenda. Now the board is 2 Democrats to 3 Republicans, so it's not likely to pass on its own, but we need to put as much public pressure on them as possible. If we can change the minds of at least one of the Republican members, we can bring back Sunday voting. And even if we don't, it is extremely important to shine light on this issue, because this is a racist attack on voting rights in Spalding County, Georgia. And they're using this as a testing ground to do it in other places. But we've got a pretty long interview today, so we're going to hop right into it. All right, thank you for coming on the pod, Justin Glawe. He's an independent journalist and has recently written an article for The Guardian regarding the issues with the Board of Election in Spalding County. So it's great to have you on, Justin.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it.
So what made you decide to look into Spalding County specifically?
Well, I just, at the beginning of the year, I started thinking about things that I wanted to write about and focus on this year. Obviously, it's an election year. So I live in Georgia, I live in Savannah, so I started kind of seeing what was going on. Obviously, I knew about SB 202, as I'm sure many of us are aware, but, I didn't really know what the specifics of it were. So kind of started digging into that. And then what really kicked it off was I found that Reuters article from December. There was an article in Reuters that talked about the Republicans in Spalding County taking over the Board of Elections. And there was one line in that article that caught my eye, and it said something about Ben Johnson, the chair of the county election board, not responding to questions about his social media posts. So immediately I was interested to see what that was all about. I found his Facebook right away. Obviously, he's posting just insane far-right conspiracy theories, everything from false claims about widespread voter fraud in 2020 to COVID misinformation, just sort of like a general melange of like globalist far-right, anti-globalist far-right, just insane conspiracy theories. And so, once I found that out, I started, kind of calling around and talking to folks, and, it's like, and I think it turned then into a broader story about the Republican takeover of the county election board, which I was able to expand on some of the things that were in the Reuters story and find some new things, I think. And so that happened. And then, of course, as I'm sure you saw today, a couple days later, I found his Twitter account, which is even more insane than his Facebook page, and exposes him as just basically full-on QAnon, which is insane for a guy who runs an elections board. And so that piece then came out today.
All right, so I'd love to get into the individuals of each of the actors in this, but first let's clarify some things, because I'll be honest, the article was a little confusing about how some of these members work. So I just want to clarify some things. The fifth member that's now chosen by the judges, is that the chair?
No. So, I mean, it can be, but they voted once they got the fifth member on the board, which is Jim Newland, who was chosen by 3 Spalding County judges: Fletcher Sams, Ben Coker, and Scott Ballard. Once he gets on the board, then at some point after that, the board, the board votes to who's going to be their chair. But at some point, they voted for Ben Johnson. I think it was in. It's unclear to me because the coverage is a little spotty from the Griffin Daily News, but I believe that he gets onto the board, is appointed onto the board by Republicans on the county commission in June of last year. Sometime after that, he becomes chair through a vote of the board. I'm not exactly sure when that's happened. When that happens.
Okay, that's very interesting and something that wasn't said in your article, because that means that the Republican members of the board voted for him, even though he's the most extreme, right? Do I have that right?
Well, right. Yeah, and for sure. And I mean, so the question that I've had throughout all of this, from the very first night that I found this Facebook page, however many weeks ago, is how much do Republicans know or not know about his belief and his belief systems? And I mean, at this point, nobody has any excuse to not know about it because I've written about it for The Guardian and now for the Daily Beast. You would have to almost purposefully avoid trying to learn about Ben Johnson's beliefs to not know what they are. But I'd like to point out that he was chair of the Republican Party of Spalding County. So obviously he has longstanding relationships with everybody from Karen Mathiak and David Knight, your local representatives in Georgia State House, Republicans on the county commission. I'm sure Republicans on the Griffin City Council. I mean, if you're chair of the county Republican Party, every mover and shaker within the party is somewhere in your Rolodex. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So they don't really have any thing happening this weekend. Or I'm sorry. There's nothing that's really stopping them from knowing about who he is and what he believes in. And so, yeah, I mean, but of course, none of them will answer any of that to me, and none of them will talk to me. But to your point, I just also wanted to point out that it was the county commission and the Republican Party of Spalding County that said, yes, you're right. Like you pointed out, this is our guy that we want on the board of elections. But before they did that, the Spalding County GOP put up Roy McLean, who is, I haven't been able to find any, I don't know what his beliefs are. I don't know if he's as radicalized as Ben Johnson is, but I do know that he is highly connected in the local Republican Party. He is a gun enthusiast, to say the least, and he's done a bunch of fundraising for Karen Mathiak. But what I was told by former Board of Election members is that when he came in, it was like he was like ready to go to war. Like, I think he believes in election fraud, falsehoods, and he came into the board ready to fight in that manner. You know what I mean? And
Roy is on the board, right?
Roy is on the board, right? So the 3 Republican members are Roy McLean, Ben Johnson, and Jim Newland, who is the 5th and deciding member that was chosen by the judges. He says because the judges thought he could be a fair and impartial tie-breaking vote. Now, Jim Newland is a self-described Republican. I don't really know much else about him. He's never served in government before. Fletcher Sams said that he used to attend a lot of election board meetings. So I don't really know much about him other than he views himself as, I guess, like a moderate Republican.
kind of, in my opinion, it's kind of hard to call any Republican moderate at this point. But
I mean, here's
you
the
know,
thing: is I did talk to Jim very briefly the other day for this Daily Beast story about Ben Johnson's QAnon beliefs, and first off, I thought it was funny. He at first I said, "What do you know about QAnon?" And he's like, "I don't know anything about that." And then I went into my little spiel where I'm like, "Okay, well, just so you know, I'm writing a story, blah 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 blah." And he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I can't hear you right now. I'm in a restaurant," you know. And then he basically hung up on me. So like, thing is whether or not Jim Newland is a moderate Republican, whatever that means in 2022, or whether or not he is somebody that would potentially side with Democrats on the elections board in something that they're voting for. Let's keep a couple things in mind when it comes to Jim Newland, which is Jim Newland comes onto the election board as this alleged impartial member, right? And the Republicans on the board, they bring up a proposal to cancel Sunday voting, which is historically a big turnout day for African Americans going back.
souls to the polls.
Yeah, souls to the polls, going back decades, right? We all know that it's a big. So Jim Newland, and then he says to me, "Well, I was like, why'd you vote to cancel Sunday voting? You know, if because basically, look, the what people are starting to see, not just in Spalding County and around Georgia, is they're starting to see Republicans, mainly white Republicans, take over Democrat, mainly black election boards and other, mainly election boards, and they're going, well, gee, I wonder why they're trying to do this, and the answer for a lot of people is that Republicans are preparing to enact measures that are going to make it harder for minorities to vote because minorities tend to vote Democrat and they want to see less of that. Or worse, that Republicans are taking over these election authorities so that they can ensure that their candidates win because they fervently believe in falsehoods about voter fraud. So, with that in mind, when the Republicans take over the Spalding County Election Board and put allegedly impartial Jim Newland as the tie-breaking vote, and then one of the first things they do as a Republican-controlled board is cancel Sunday voting. Well, I was telling Jim, don't you see what people are going to think when you do that? And Jim's response was, well, it has nothing to do with black people voting on Sundays. We just couldn't afford it. Okay? So Jim O'Brien, one of the Democrats on the Spalding County Board of Elections, tells me that the cost of Sunday voting to the county is something like $1,000, right? Currently, one of the things that the board is considering is doing another audit and another investigation into debunked claims of widespread voter fraud in the 2020 election. And I think O'Brien makes a good point when he says, if we can't afford Sunday voting, how can we afford to have an investigation into something that's already been proven doesn't really exist?
Exactly, especially since the American Rescue Plan has given our county plenty of money to run things for COVID-related things, and voting is one of those things that it lines out to be something you could spend money on. So we even have extra money that could be spent on it. But I kind of want to see, since you looked into the candidates for the fifth position, how did Jim or James Newland stack up against the other people the judges had to pick between? Like, what were some of the differences in credentials?
So I don't know who the other Republican candidates were. I may have learned their identities, but off the top of my head, I don't remember them. But what mine and honestly, Fletcher. And here's the thing that's so crazy about this whole process: Fletcher Sams, the Superior Court judge who was in charge of the process, he couldn't even remember how many people there were or who they were. So this was not like a really formalized process where the judges like wrote down who the candidates were. Like, I don't think there's any document that you can get that has any sort of information about. It's all in the heads of the judges who did this thing, right? So it is quite literally a secret vote. Like, there's no transparency here about it. I will give Sam's credit in that he talked to me extensively and tried to remember as much as he could about the process. But with that being said, I don't know who the other two or one. He believes that there were three candidates from each side, and they were each local political party gets to present their candidates. Sam's remembers there being three from each side: Jim Newland and possibly two other Republicans, and then on the Democrat side you had Vera McIntosh and Elbert Solomon, and possibly a third person who I've never been able to, excuse me, to find out. Vera McIntosh, as you know, is a former Democrat member of the Board of Elections. I don't know how long she had been in that position, but several years, I believe. And then Elbert Solomon, who is, I'm pretty sure that the chair of the Spalding County Democratic Party. He's a long
Former
time
chair.
former chair. Okay, yeah, but he's a long time, well-known Black Democrat in the area. But so I mean, I don't know all of what went on in it. Um, Elbert Solomon says his interview was very brief. I haven't talked to Vera McIntosh about her interview, but the bottom line is with what we know, based off of what Sams and Newland and Solomon have told us, is that the judges had, on one hand, Jim Newland, no prior government experience, apparently just a retired kind of business guy who moved down to Griffin, Georgia, or moved to Sun City, Georgia. I don't know, a number of years ago. Not a long time guy. And then you have, on the other hand, Vera McIntosh, who has experience being on the board of elections, but also happens to be Black and a Democrat. Now, that being said, I can't really make a sustained allegation that Republican politics played a direct role in the choosing of Newland over McIntosh and the other candidates. Because, for one, Fletcher Sams identifies himself as an independent. He noted that in the 80s, when he ran for a district attorney position, he ran as a Democrat. The other judges I was not able to talk to when they didn't respond to requests for comment. And they don't, so I wasn't able to determine their political affiliations, but they don't obviously show up as Republican or Democrat candidates in like online searches. I couldn't find campaign donations with the Federal Elections Commission, so they're really kind of just big question marks as to what their political affiliations.
Well, things like that as a judge, you can't really do. Like that would be an ethics violation, like campaign donations and open advocacy for certain things. That's ethics violations as a judge.
Right. But, like in the case of Sam's, running for previous positions where you do claim a political affiliation can give us some insight into what their leanings are. Now, all that being said, let's think about why it is and how it is that the judges came to be in the position of choosing the fifth member, which you know of, right?
That's what I was going to ask next is could you, since you looked into this, lay out sort of a timeline and how HB 769, the law written by our two state legislators and signed by the governor to affect specifically Spalding County, how did that come to be and what effects does it have? Like, how does it work?
The law was introduced either 2 or 4 days before the end of the 2021 legislative session. It's my understanding that.
You mean 2020?
Yeah, you're right. Sorry, 2020 session. Yeah, it's my understanding that a lot of laws, not necessarily like this, but I've learned from people familiar with how this works. I'm not very familiar myself with the ins and outs of the Georgia legislature, but this is what's known as kind of like a local kind of like pet project law. Like your local reps, they introduce a law that deals with the county, and like, let's be honest, somebody from Chatham County, where I live, isn't going to know what the specific needs of Spalding County are. So if the reps from Spalding County introduce a bill and they go, look, our county commission asked us to do this, we need to get this money because we need to fix these roads or whatever. The people from Chatham County are going to be like, all right, yeah, that's your deal, fine, whatever, I'll vote for that, right? So it's like this law, because it specifically deals with Spalding County, may have been easier to get past other legislators.
I do know, I'm pretty sure that the rest of the legislature doesn't have to vote on it. Only representatives from that county have to vote on it.
Okay.
And so it was specifically David Knight and Karen Mathiak who voted on this bill, because before redistricting, we only had 2 representatives.
Okay.
And then it was just the governor had to sign it and approve it.
Well, then there you go. I mean, that makes it even easier to do what they did. So they introduced the law right before the end of the legislative session, for whatever that's worth. I don't really know whether that was done on purpose to avoid people noticing it as much or what, but they do that.
That was after the election, right? The 2020 election.
After the 2020 election, which, Albert Solomon, Alfred Jester, and Alfred is the second Democrat on the county election board meeting. They both point out to me that ahead of the 2020 election, Democrats in Spalding County registered like 900 new voters, right? And a lot of those people were blacks who were going to probably vote Democrat, right? And so that happens, right? And then we all know what happened in 2020. Trump lost, Warnock
in Georgia.
He lost Georgia, which was huge. Now, he won in Spalding County by like 60%. I think if I remember right, Loeffler maybe barely squeaked by in Spalding County. But let's also remember, so if we're going to think of HB 769, I think you're right to point out, let's think about what happened in 2020. Democrats register 900 new voters. Trump loses Georgia. Loeffler barely squeaks by. A black Democrat is almost elected mayor of Griffin, the county seat, which
2019.
I'm sorry?
I said in 2019 was the mayor election.
Yeah, and you're right, in 2019. So, but all of this is occurring not in a vacuum. It is occurring in a place that has historically been, from my look at voting returns going back years, it's always been a Republican stronghold. So all these things happen, right? David Knight and Karen Mathiak introduced HB 769, which really effectively, the only thing it really does, the most important thing it does is it allows for this vote by, not just allows, but requires a vote by three of the Superior Court judges in Spalding County to choose the fifth member of the Board of Elections, right? So we know basically the way that it works is that the Republicans and the Democrat each get 2 people to put on the board, right? So now we are in gridlock. So there needs to be somebody to break the tie. Well, who is that person? Prior, as you pointed out to me when we first started talking about all of this, prior to HB 769, the Democrats and the Republicans on the board, they would put up their own candidates. The Democrats would put up Democrat candidates. The Republicans would put up Republican ones. Oh, and guess what? We couldn't come to an agreement on who should be the fifth and tie-breaking member because everybody wants their side to win. You know what I mean? So they would flip a coin, right? Which actually seems like not a bad idea looking back on it, right? And so this law changed that. HB 769 said it's not going to be up to the board anymore to choose their own fifth member. It's going to be up to this 3-judge panel, and they need to choose the member. But how, why, or how, when, in what way? The law doesn't say. And so when the judges learn of HB 769, they go, well, I guess we have to do this now. How are we going to do this? And they have to come up with their whole own system of how to do this, which we can get into if you like. It's not very interesting. But so let's just think about that. Why would Karen Mathiak and David Knight want it to be so that 3 judges in Spalding County decide who the fifth member of the Board of Elections is? Why? Why not leave it up to the Board of Elections? That's a question that no one I've been talking to has been able to solidly answer, including Mathiak and Knight themselves.
I thought the claim was the board was corrupt, and so they want to have this law so that the judges pick the candidates. Because wasn't the previous chair Marcia Ridley?
No, she was not the chair. She was the election supervisor. So
Oh,
the election supervisor is like an administrative position, right?
yeah.
It's almost like
They don't get a vote, but they kind of operate things.
correct. Like you can't vote, but okay, so put it this way. Here's a way to think about it. You don't have to know anything about elections to be on the elections board, right? Because it's comprised of appointees from the political parties. And we all know that if you're a loyal person in your party, I mean, look at all the people Donald Trump put up in positions of power in his administration that had no expertise in literally anything that they did, and they were running federal agencies. So,
Literally his family members.
right, exactly. But the election supervisor theoretically is supposed to be somebody who has experience administering the logistics of an election, right?
Yeah,
Because
which can I point out, the new election supervisor that got her job because Marcia Ridley lost her job due to HB 769 did not have previous training and had to be trained while running, like while the 2021 elections were starting. She was still in training to do the job
correct,
because she didn't know how to do it.
correct, because once again, the board does choose who the election supervisor is going to be. So it's up to them whether they want to choose Marcia Ridley, who has experience, did screw some things up, it looks like, or the current supervisor, who is Kim Slaughter, and had no experience, but also, to be fair, Jim O'Brien, one of the Democrats on the board, has said he's been surprised with how well she has been able to handle it. And really, I don't think that my understanding of it, at least in Spalding County as it is, in regards to Slaughter and Ridley, I don't really think that there's much of anything that they can do in their positions to really insert partisanism into their day-to-day job. My understanding is that it really is an administrative position. It's a nuts and bolts. Hey, you have the key to unlock the precinct at this time so that people can come in. Do we have the backup ballots if the machines go down? It's an administrative position that deals with logistics. But, you know, so that being said, the people on the board that's what makes the tie-breaking vote so important, and that's what makes the people on the board so important, is because they are essentially constructing the rule book for the election supervisor to play by, right? So that's where their politics are a very big deal.
Okay, so Ben Johnson, you've looked into him a lot because you found QAnon stuff and a bunch of other things. So tell me what you know about Ben Johnson, and now as the chair elected by the board, what kind of, like, the things that would be tied to that, like the beliefs of QAnon election fraud, and even the trial he brought up, even though the trial is bullshit.
Yeah. So I mean, first off, like the QAnon stuff is weird and unsettling and disturbing because it is just a completely unhinged conspiracy theory that has a lot of sort of anti-Semitic vibes to it, and it's just, I don't know. It's anybody who doesn't know about it, just go to Wikipedia and read about it. It is disturbing stuff. It is, it's one of these things that you hear all kinds of stories. People have lost loved ones to it and family members who cut themselves off. I mean, it is cult like, if not a full out cult. So
I would say it's a cult.
yeah, yeah. So that's one thing to take into account. Now, the other thing is that is I think is more to the point for people in Spalding County to know and to possibly be concerned about is not that Ben Johnson thinks there is a global secret cabal of liberals and Democrats who worship Satan and eat babies, as disturbing as that is, but that he fervently believes that there was widespread voter fraud in the 2020 elections and that something has to be done about it, Now he is in a position of power to do something about it. And so, what does that look like? Well, for one, for right now, what that looks like is Ben Johnson going after Dominion voting systems and possibly finding a way for Spalding County to have some other provider of voting software for them to operate with, because Ben Johnson doesn't believe that Dominion voting system software is safe. And he may further believe that so one of the things that he did tweet about regarding Dominion was he tweeted about this thing called Italy Gate, um, which is like the level of online rabbit holes you have to go down to understand some of what this dude is talking about are really quite something. So Italy Gate is a debunked conspiracy theory that security officials in Italy, physically in Italy during the 2020 election, were somehow able to change or alter actual votes themselves through Dominion software. So Ben Johnson tweets, election fraud is not a myth, hashtag Italygate. So this is just one of the elements of conspiracy theories involving Dominion that he believes in.
And to be clear, they change votes like just for the president, or how does that work? Like, because people elected Republicans at lower levels.
Here's the thing is that it's never really laid out. You know, a lot of this is just kind of like fever dream type stuff. But no, I mean, you make a good point, which is that this is something that none of these conspiracy theorists have ever been able to they've never been able to around this corner here, which is that, well, if there was all of this stuff going on to make sure that Donald Trump became president, does that mean that all the Republicans who won office also, though, that also didn't count, or there was fraud involved with that, or was it just a campaign to make sure that Donald Trump got elected? And you know what? If it was just Donald Trump, then let's talk about here in Georgia. Like, if all these various secret, nefarious actors around the globe got together and hacked Dominion or put in Chinese ballots or whatever it was that they did to elect Joe Biden, that these people think they did to elect Joe Biden, then why wouldn't they have done that for every Democrat running across the country? And did they do that for John Ossoff, who had a stunning upset victory? Did they do that for Raphael Warnock, the first black person to be a senator in Georgia ever? Right. Because you don't see those allegations being levied. It's all about Trump.
So, well, actually, the allegations are there. In the November election board meeting of 2021, Ben Johnson makes a claim about the voting machine. So one of the voting machines in the 2021 election for Spalding County was loaded with the special election from February and with the runoff election in January. And that was just a mistake from their staff. But Ben Johnson, and I know that because I confirmed it with Kim Slaughter in a meeting I had privately. It was just a mistake by the Spalding County Elections Board. But in the public meeting, Ben Johnson claims that it was the Dominion voting machines. And this is on record. He's trying to make it seem like the runoff elections were bullshit. But that goes back to what I was saying about the Republicans winning. Is in that election, there were 3 people on the ballot, right? John Ossoff, Raphael Warnock, and our I forgot what seat it is. I can't remember what it is. One of the statewide commissioners. And the incumbent's called Bubba. I forgot his last name. And Daniel Blackman was running against him. Daniel Blackman's a Democrat. Bubba's a Republican. Yeah. And Bubba won on the same ballots that John and Raphael won. So, like, is that invalid? Why would a Republican win if it was rigged for the Democrats?
Because here's the thing about people like Ben Johnson is that it's not logical. It's not factual. It's point out the things that you think point to your argument that there's widespread voter fraud and ignore everything else that doesn't conveniently fit into that box. Okay? And the reason that they do this is and this is why I think you're right to call a lot of this behavior cultish, because they only do it when they're told by Big Daddy Donald Trump to do it. You
Mm-hmm.
know, this is all about a white backlash to Donald Trump losing, which, by the way, just in terms of like if you were a betting person, you would not have bet against Donald Trump because he's an incumbent president. Incumbent
Mm-hmm.
presidents hardly ever lose reelection attempts. So, as shocking as Donald Trump's victory was in 16, you could make the argument that for a lot of Republicans, his loss was just as shocking. And you'll see them post things like, how can he lose when all these people go to his rallies and nobody shows up at Biden's rallies? Well, a lot of people went to Trump's rallies because they didn't think COVID was real. And a lot of people didn't go to Biden rallies because they did believe that like it was a dangerous virus and they didn't want to catch it and die on a ventilator, right? But regardless of any of that, I'm glad that you brought up the meeting thing because in December, Ben Johnson again brings up Dominion voting systems. And because basically what's happening here is that the county, Dominion does not have contracts with individual counties to run voting systems and machines and software. Dominion has a contract with Georgia's Secretary of State's office, which they won in 2020, I think in 2019, whatever, like right before the 2020 election, through what is it called a competitive bid process where they had to they and many other vendors who do this type of work would have had to submit detailed responses to requests for proposal on how they would run voting machines systems, all kinds of. I mean, this is like a complex thing here. This is not, we're talking about millions and millions of voters, 159 individual counties, and this is, and the Secretary of State, by the way, is a Republican.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so let's keep that in mind as we talk about what Ben Johnson says in regards to Dominion voting now. So he brings so there's no contract with the county, but the county is on the hook to pay for certain things that Dominion does through their however much money the Board of Elections is appropriated for by the county board of commissioners, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in December, there's a meeting at the election board that, for personal and private reasons, neither Democrat member could attend. So it's just the three Republicans and Kim Slaughter and, the secretary taking notes. And Ben Johnson starts talking about the money that Dominion has to pay, or I'm sorry, that they have to pay to Dominion to do like troubleshooting or software updates or whatever. Like it's in the tens of thousands of dollars. And he's complaining about this because he's saying, well, we don't actually have a contract with the county. And, he says, I can't get certain answers out of Dominion about what happens if something goes wrong and who my contact is there, which, is a valid concern. But he's very against having Dominion at all. Anyway, in that December meeting, he says, and then he describes this incredible discovery that he makes, right? He finds this court case, this lawsuit that's happening in Georgia State Court. And it's brought by a Republican representative, I don't know what area from, named Philip Singleton. And he's suing the Secretary of State Raffensperger regarding Dominion voting machines. And it's very complicated, very technical. But it has something to do with the type of software that is used, I think, in reading QR codes, maybe, or something like that. But basically, so Ben describes this incredible discovery that he's made, that a judge in that case has said, actually, the software that Dominion is using is against Georgia rules and laws about software that can be used for voting systems. The software that Dominion is using, Johnson cites this judge as saying, is, quote, illegal, right? He says, to sum this up for his fellow Republican colleagues on the election board, he says, so basically the software that we're using for voting in Spalding County, a judge has called illegal, which blows my mind. And I'm like, wow, yeah, is crazy. I should probably look that up. And so I find the court case and I find the docket, and I'm not able to really find it's not a great online system in Fulton County where the court case is happening. I'm not able to find any real documents about any judge's comments about the case, but what I do find is that the case is scheduled to go to trial in December of 2022. Now, it strikes me as a little bit implausible that a judge overseeing a case that is scheduled to go to trial later this year would make a judgment as vociferous as this software is illegal ahead of the trial.
Mm-hmm. That would be a violation of ethics, which could get them unbarred.
And also, if the judge thinks it's illegal, what's the point of going to trial? So I don't know where Ben Johnson got that from, but all I know is that, he says stuff like this at a public board meeting, and there's a he has a very, like put together demeanor. So saying that at a board meeting without the context behind it and then without the fact checking, it gives it this air of credulity that it should not have, right?
Mm-hmm.
And considering what we know about Ben's online reading habits, which apparently involve insane far-right conspiracy sources, who knows where he got that information,
mm-hmm. He's using his position to indoctrinate regular people into the QAnon beliefs.
Right. And he's also using his position to, like I said, give an air of, he's a public official at a public board meeting.
He's the chair.
And so when he says something, if you didn't know any better and you were just a member of the public, that carries a lot of weight with it.
Yes. And the thing about Dominion is, I'm sure you're aware, there's been plenty of court cases against them, and they were all lost, to the point that on public news, they can't say that Dominion was involved in election fraud because that would be defamation, because Dominion won lawsuits that claimed election fraud. And so specifically, judges have already ruled that that Dominion did not do anything wrong in the 2020 election.
Right. I have a thought on that. Are you going to be able to edit this at all if I go get water?
Yeah, we can do a quick pause real quick. Actually, sure. I should probably run an ad break at this point of the video anyway, so that's perfect. I'm going to pause. All right, so once again, I need to bring up the greatest reunion ever. The former students of Mr. Don, William Tennyson, have come together to do one more concert in his honor. He is going through some health problems in his life right now, and we want to thank him as being one of the best teachers Spalding County has seen, at least musicians in Spalding County. So we're throwing this concert, and we need financial support to be able to do it. And any proceeds that are left over, we're going to give to Mr. Don to help cover his medical bills. So this is going to be held at Eagles Way Church in Spalding County. The GoFundMe will be in the description. Please check that out. I'm going to let you get right back into the interview. All right, and we're back. So we were talking about the Dominion court cases.
Yes. Hang on, sorry, 1 second. I got to check that. So yes, you're right to point out that. So the big lawsuit that's happening right now is Dominion is suing Fox News for defamation, because they spread a lot of unproven allegations about how Dominion was involved with voter fraud throughout the 2020 election. That's a huge court case. I think it's in the billions of dollars, right?
Mm-hmm. And it affected other news networks too, like OAN and Newsmax.
Yes, I believe so. Yes, I think you're right. So it's a huge deal, and as part of that court case, or no, so that's one thing that you're right to point out, which is that we know there was no widespread voter fraud in 2020, for number one. And for number two, we know that Dominion's voting systems, which are used in Georgia, I think Louisiana, and some other states statewide, were secure. Look, there's always going to be some fraud, some hacks some problems, but overall, you know, the Republican Secretary of State in Georgia, dozens of court cases over which federal Republican appointed judges presided have all said that the election was safe and secure, it was free and fair, and Dominion's stuff worked like it's supposed to, and there wasn't widespread fraud. So that is that is our baseline with what we should start with.
Like, I'm pretty sure the Republican Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, has made a statement about this after the audits and investigations, that the voter fraud was less than 100 cases. And of course, Joe Biden won by over 11,000 votes. So it's completely insignificant. And the Republican Secretary of State agrees the voter fraud was completely insignificant.
Not only that, but he's also made numerous statements refuting allegations of conspiracy theories involving Dominion specifically, which is another thing to keep in mind before I say what I'm about to say, which is that there is currently a court case in Louisiana that has exposed some vulnerabilities to hacking in Dominion's system. So there's apparently a professor at the University of Michigan, or somewhere up in Michigan, was given some sort of access, administrative access, as part of a research project to see if he could poke holes in the software. So he was given and he was able to do so. And he was able, I believe, what he was able to do is, so when you vote, you hit Donald Trump, and it prints out a piece of paper that has a QR code on it that is then scanned in. Now, you could see on the piece of paper that you selected Donald Trump, but the human eye cannot read a QR code. We don't know what's in that QR code. So this guy claims that he was able to change the QR code so that instead of it reading Donald Trump, it would read someone else, right? Or, what one candidate over another, not necessarily Donald Trump and Biden. So this law, and this report has not yet been released, but it's being kind of leaked out a little bit. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution had a story about this, I think on Monday, or it came out over the weekend. Anyway, so this vulnerability has been exposed, which isn't surprising. I mean, pretty much anything can be hacked if you try hard enough. Now,
yes.
What Raffensperger has said is this is bunk. He said that it was similar to saying, well, I can break into your house if you tell me where you live and you give me the house keys to do it, right?
Exactly.
So he's saying it's not really a thing to be concerned about. But what I wanted to bring up in all of that is that I was talking with somebody from the New Voter Project, or New Georgia Project, which is kind of a voting rights advocacy, kind of lefty type group,
It's one of Stacey Abrams' groups.
Yeah, I think so. And I was asking this guy because, you and I have talked about this before. One of the things that we've never really been able to figure out with Ben Johnson is, because his company does IT work for the county, what, if anything, could he do to mess with an election in Spalding County? And the guy from New Georgia Project that I was talking to, he said, well, normally I would say nothing, but he's like, I do have to mention this court case that just came out that shows that actually, if you have some level of administrative access to this software system, you can actually manipulate votes. And so, he's not alleging that, I'm not alleging that Johnson is trying to do that or that he would do that. But the bottom line is Johnson, the county attorney, the county administrator, the county commission, they all have very serious questions to answer about what level of access Ben Johnson has through his company. And they all have really not done it. Now, I will say the county attorney is working on about 24 Open Records Act requests that I put in for information about contracts and trying to figure out more about what his company does. So we're going to get to the bottom of that. But the bottom line is all the powers that be in Spalding County that are elected officials or appointed government officials, they need to answer to the concerns about the conflict of interest that all presents. You know what I mean? And they have not done so, to me at least.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was saying at the election board's meeting in October, was that it's a conflict of interest. There's no evidence or claims that Ben Johnson is doing anything, but the fact that he owns and operates Liberty Technology, and they have contracts with the servers for the city of Griffin and Spalding County, he could do something. Or even if he didn't do something, he has access to data that he could view as well. It's just a conflict of interest that I would view as an ethics violation, right?
Okay, but let's think about this too. I'm glad it's funny you brought that up, because what is Ben Johnson's first real? So he did serve on the board of elections for 3 years, sometime before all of this, and then took some sort of break to do other stuff, right? So I mean, he does have that experience. But one of his other government positions that he's had is he was appointed to to the county ethics review board back in like 2018 or 2019 by James Duff. So
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I just find that like so deliciously ironic, right? Like, here's a guy, he's like a hardcore Republican, like small government, get out of our lives, just very like sort of anti-government, just your typical like hardcore conservative beliefs. And he runs a company that contracts with the government, and then he gets appointed to be on the ethics review board, and then later around the same time when he's also on a county government body. I mean, it's just like, you honestly couldn't make it. If you wrote that as fiction, people would be like, that's not, come on, that's not believable.
Well, this is kind of the thing, and this is just me delving into ideology, not anything specific with this case, but like I feel like this small government that conservatives and right-leaning libertarians like is that they want it to be a small government so that a group of elites can control it. Like, it's small as in only a certain people control it, and specifically with the libertarian types, which I'm assuming he is because of his profile picture of Elon Musk on Facebook and stuff. Is he wants the market to decide government roles. And so him being the owner of the IT company, I think he wants to be in government because he believes business owners and companies like that in the private market should run the government rather than it being a publicly controlled, regulated thing.
Right, but what he's not saying is he's not being open and transparent about how the market, i.e., his company, is manipulating the forces of government for his own personal financial benefit, right?
Right.
And so
Right.
I also want to point out that Ben Johnson's company did not have the contract to do IT and software work for the county prior to 2015. And my understanding is that the sequence of events was that there was a previous county manager, which is again like another administrative position. You can kind of think of it like the mayor for the county, Instead of the mayor and the city council, you have the county manager and the county commission, right? So there was a previous county manager that did not get his contract renewed, right? So he's no longer the county manager. So he leaves and goes and works for Ben Johnson's company, Liberty Technology. He comes back to the county, gets his position as county manager back, and at that point then Liberty Technology starts getting the annual contract to do all of this software and IT work for the county.
So when exactly did that happen? Like,
well, it was I believe that his contract was not reviewed, and he left his position as county manager in like 2014, and then he comes back, and 2015 is when Liberty has its like first. I haven't confirmed all of this yet. Still a little unclear as to but this is what I just described is not very close from, or not very far from what actually happened, and I'm going to figure all that out. Because what I do know,
that's something I didn't even know about, because the previous county manager has some big issues that I've been looking into, and I don't want to make claims yet, but I thought it was a consecutive like 35 years of service. I didn't know there were breaks in it,
I don't know. This is just what people in the area have been telling me, and what I can say with 100% certainty is that Liberty starts getting the county IT work in 2015. That's what I do know with 100% certainty. other things, that all that other stuff are allegations that other people have made to me that I have not yet had a chance to fully vet. But I
And you
don't think
said,
they're that far probably off, knowing what I know about Ben Johnson.
and you said one of the allegations is that that county manager, when he went on break, became an employee of Liberty Technology.
Right. Again, not able to confirm, but this is the allegation that was made to me. So, but I think what the broader point is that Ben Johnson, he wants to have his cake and eat it too, right? He wants to have a small government, low taxes, all of this, but he also makes a decent chunk of change from that government
Mm-hmm.
in addition to serving on it. And it's like, we all know how things happen in the workplace. There's politics in every workplace. There's interpersonal relationships that happen. There's coworkers that we like, that we don't like. We all do things in our place of business, in our work, to try to get ourselves. Everybody wants a nice life. We want a nice house. We want to have enough money to retire and all of these things. You got to work hard to do all that, right? So in our interpersonal relationships, in our workplaces, we're always trying to get one leg up and prove something to our boss that look at this great thing that I did and get that next promotion and do all of these things. So when Ben Johnson presents himself online, really as this small government libertarian, independent person, we don't need the government, all of that. It's a whole bunch of bunk because
Mm-hmm.
in reality, what he is somebody who works those interpersonal relationships through his relationship with Republicans that have positions of power in government, through his relationships on the county board of elections, to make sure that his company gets a nice big fat contract with the county to do all of their software and IT work. So that's who he is. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I'm saying? Not this Bitcoin mining, small government, tech CEO guy. Look, I'm not saying that he's going to become a multimillionaire off his work for Spalding County. In fact, I don't even really know how much he makes at this point. I mean, I've got invoices going back years, and it seems like it's in the tens of thousands of dollars a month range a lot of times. But the total dollar amount, I don't really know.
Well, I would love to talk about Ben Johnson all night, but I do have some other points I would like to ask you about. One thing is recently, and this is something that was actually brought up by Jim O'Brien at the most recent Democratic committee meeting, is the email attacks, the spam of thousands of emails from people outside of Spalding County claiming election fraud in Spalding County. So what is it you know about this, and how does Jovan Pulitzer play into this? And are there other actors involved as well?
Yeah. So December, the board members themselves, they all have government email addresses, and as does Kim Slaughter, the supervisor. And there's other election office staff, like
Mm-hmm.
administrative staff. I don't really know how many, but they all get hit with some 2,000 emails from all over the country, basically demanding investigations and audits into debunked claims of voter fraud, specifically in Spalding County, specifically during the 2020 election. Okay. Maybe about 60 of those are from Spalding County residents. The rest are from everywhere else, right? And the emails, most of them, some of them have a very sort of amateurish document attached to them that has like insane claims. I have it right here. Insane claims of investigating whether children voters voting that were born before 1900, things like that. And it looks like this, which is just like a little list type thing. But then a lot of the other emails have a very put together and professional looking document that's about 4 or 5 pages long, that reads a lot like a legal document, like an affidavit for a search warrant or an indictment or something like that. And the way that the document is structured is that you, as the petitioner, you're not filing actually a legal petition, but anybody can ask a government employee to do something for them, So you as the petitioner, you just put your name on the top sentence. I, Zach Fuller, request, and then all the way down for 4 pages, laying out allegation after allegation after allegation after allegation, all of which are currently being investigated or have been investigated by authorities in Georgia and deemed not to be, accurate, right? So that's the bulk of the emails that the Board of Elections gets, right? And so it's like, well, where did these come from? Like all of a sudden, Spalding County gets bombarded with 2,000 emails calling for an investigation into election that happened a year and a half ago. Like, what the hell is going on here? We don't really get much in the ways of answers for that. Jim O'Brien asked at a board meeting earlier this month, what do you know about this? And Ben Johnson kind of says something about, oh, I think some YouTube influencers got a hold of some allegations and they had a lot of followers. I've since learned that Johnson has named two type of like far right YouTube influencers as people who have talked about Spalding County as being the possible like source of, they could have said, hey, all you patriots out there, we need you to sign these letters and you can go download them here. And here's the, he may have said something like that. I don't know. I haven't been able to figure all that out yet. All I know is that Ben Johnson cites these two in YouTube influencer people as possibly being the impetus for this email thing, right? But that's all well and good. But Jim O'Brien has serious questions about who in Spalding County was maybe involved with helping to spread the word that led to that email campaign. And I think that's more to the point, which is, because now what's happening is Ben Johnson is taking these allegations seriously and saying, well, maybe we should do another investigation and another audit into the 2020 election. And Jim Newman, the new impartial Republican on the board at the last board meeting, seemed open to that idea. He said, well, if we're going to do that, we can't audit ourselves. That doesn't seem right, which is a valid point, sort of alluding to that they would have to hire an outside party to conduct these audits, these totally unnecessary audits. So back to the letters themselves. They first off, they mentioned Jovan Hutton Pulitzer, who I'll get to in a second, but they also demand that the Board of Elections and the county commissioner hear a presentation from a woman named Ashley Gillis of a group called the Georgia Patriots. Who knows what the Georgia Patriots are? That's a generic name. There's a million groups that could be. Ashley Gillis, there's a woman named Ashley Gillis who lives in Lamar County. She's on the Lamar County GOP board. She served as various type of elections type things before, a poll watcher. She helped adjudicate votes in Spalding County during the 2020 election. She was asked by the Secretary of State to testify at a Senate hearing about allegations of fraud. There's a video on YouTube of her testimony that has like 40 views. Anyway, when I get a hold of her and I go,
please send me that.
What's that? I will. Well, I mean, honestly, like she seems like a very reasonable, actual modern Republican. She has concerns and questions about irregularities that occurred in Spalding County during 2020, but she does not appear to me to be a full-out like election denier person. We had a nice conversation, and she seems very reasonable. And honestly, the video, she's not really making allegations that there was voter fraud. She's just sort of saying, this was weird. I don't understand why the workers did that, whatever, right? So she was probably found by some far-right person who was like, look at this person who was there on the ground. Who knows, right? But anyway, when I get a hold of her, she's like, I don't know who the Georgia Patriots are. I have not made allegations of widespread voter fraud. My testimony is involved in an investigation that is ongoing, and I'm not going to talk about that because I'm going to let the investigators come to their own conclusion. So she has no idea why she's even being named in this letter, right? Which is bizarre, and I haven't been able to get to the bottom of. But who I know more about is Jovan Hutton Pulitzer. So the letter also demands that any technology used in an audit or investigation be approved by Jovan Hutton Pulitzer, who is a lot of different things, but most recently has become famous for being a hardcore election conspiracy theorist that was involved with the weird and unnecessary audit that happened in Maricopa County, Arizona. So Jovan Hutton Pulitzer.
Wait, the Cyber Ninjas company?
Correct.
Okay.
So they were like, we also got to use this guy's technology because his technology is the best stuff at figuring out. This guy claims to have proprietary technology that can detect the presence of bamboo in paper ballots, which would indicate that those ballots were filled out in China.
Which is just racist and doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense because how the fuck would a ballot filled out in China get mailed into it? It doesn't make any sense at all. It is absolutely insane. But this is the level of conspiracy theorists that we're talking about. Now, where did that letter come from and who was behind it and who all in Spalding County was involved in it? We don't know the answers to that. What we do know is that Jovan Hutton Pulitzer is a fairly obscure conspiracy theorist on the far right. Somebody that honestly I had never heard of until I saw that letter. And my job is to read the news all day long, right? He's also a guy that Ben Johnson has cited specifically on Twitter and tweeted at and involving, and seems to like and appreciate his work on ensuring that elections have integrity. So I'm just going to leave that there.
That would make sense, especially since he immediately cited to Jim that he thought it was two YouTubers. Right.
Well, he didn't say the two YouTubers. He said something about, maybe somebody on YouTube got a hold of it. And then later on, he tells Jim, and he names two people, two actual influencers that I've found. Later on, he tells that to Jim.
Oh, yeah. And it wasn't Jovan Pulitzer?
No, it was. I haven't even had time to look them up yet. But I mean, they have significant followers, but for like a normal person that isn't in those far right online circles, you would never know you would have never heard of these people. So I think there are some very serious questions about who all knew about that letter, specifically Ben Johnson, that need to be answered.
Well, this leads me to the next thing, which I kind of want your opinion on, but also I just kind of want to point out in general, is even if the current board of elections doesn't do anything to like fuck with the voting, right? In SB 202, there is a provision in it that says that if the Secretary of State or the state board of elections determines that there is corruption or some kind of issue with a county board of elections, they can invoke this provision to overturn the election board. So the election board no longer runs the elections, and instead a single appointee from the governor runs that county's elections. Now, because of all the issues and conflicts of interest with Ben Johnson and the issues that HB 769 have caused, do you think that this provision from SB 202, do you think they're sort of counting, and by them I mean like the GOP, whether county or statewide, might be counting on this being deemed a bad board so that the governor can run the election in this county?
That's a good question. I don't really know. My gut reaction is that I think that provision is a way for Georgia Republicans to make sure that their bases are covered regardless of what happens. If they're not able to, through a law like HB 769, take over a county election board, well, they'll just have, I think it's a newly created legislative body in the Georgia legislature, I believe, who handles this decision on whether or not to appoint a single person, like you said. They'll just have them do that. If they can't take over the election board, well, then by God, they'll just say that election board is incompetent and they can't run the elections, so we need to send our guy down there. I don't necessarily think I think that's more of a situation that they would look to employ in more Democrat heavy places. But it's also certainly my other understanding is that that call to have um, somebody that the election board is able to perform their task. That call doesn't it also have to come from like local elected officials, like the county commission or something like that?
I think they can submit a request of that, but I'm pretty sure it lays out that if there's just suspicion and it's something that has to be voted on by the body, which I'm not sure if it's called the State Board of Elections, but that's essentially what it is. It's a small group of people that used to be chaired by the Secretary of State, but SB 202 actually changed that and stripped the Secretary of State of power over that.
Right. And he's no on it, and there's one Democrat and like 3 or 4 Republicans on it. So I mean, I think what that does is it's like a safety net. If they can't get done what they need to done through the restructuring and of the election boards, then they could just go in and just sort of manhandle it. And you know what? Look, that could be used in a situation. I could see a situation in which an election board like a Republican majority one in Spalding County, they're not able to do certain things because one or both of the Democrats won't vote for them. And so they throw up their hands and they go, well, you know what? This board is dysfunctional and incompetent, and it's up to you guys now. And then the Republicans on the state election board just go, yeah, well, we agree with that. And then they send somebody down to manhandle the process,
Right. And that's one of the many reasons SB 202 is so damning for voting rights and why it's called Jim Crow 2.0 is it really does kind of destroy a lot of the trust and ability of people to actually have to cast their votes.
Right.
But do you have any suggestions for people like regular citizens of how we can sort of help this situation, help, I guess, keep the elections fair and get some of these crazies that are doing these things out of office? Or how would you suggest people get involved?
I think the first thing that you got to do is you got to pay attention to what your local representatives are introducing in the legislature, because it's not just SB 202. There are currently 14 laws in 10 counties that affect the structuring and the rules regarding election board officials, and so much like HB 769 that affected only Spalding County. So, we're now entering a new legislative session. So the question becomes, how many other counties are going to introduce laws that allows Republicans to take over election boards and have their way and cancel Sunday voting and reduce polling locations and all of these voter suppression tactics that we know that they'll like to employ. So I would say, one, pay attention to what your elected representatives are doing. Two, I would say, you got to get involved in even if it's just going to the meetings. Sunlight is a great disinfectant, and these people know that that their business is being paid attention to, and that members of the community are actively participating in the democratic process and showing up to meetings, signing up to give public comment. They'll be less inclined, hopefully, to do things that are not popular with their own members of their own communities. Because at the end of the day, Griffin's a small place. Ben Johnson has to walk into McDonald's and see people that disagree with his politics. He's not. They're not immune from that, and that pressure can result in not pressuring them not to do things that are against voting rights and other matters.
Right, and I completely agree. Like I can think of some examples that aren't even from the state legislature level, like in Lincolnton County, which is a very small county in South Georgia. It had 8 precincts in previous elections, and it's a very rural area, so the more precincts helps people vote. And their board is trying to reduce it down to 1 precinct, which would screw over people that live 30, 40 minutes in the same county, but away from where that precinct is with no public transportation. that would make it very hard for them to
Right.
vote.
And look what happened when they introduced that. People in Lincolnton, they raised holy hell about that, and they got the word out about it, and it got picked up by the local news. The AJC wrote about it. There was a story in the New York Times over the weekend in Lincolnton about people saying, and look, the Lincoln County election supervisor is a black woman, and she's saying it has nothing to do with race, but then there are whites and blacks both saying we need these polling locations. My 85-year-old grandma can't drive 40 miles to Lincoln to vote. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But that's a great example of the locals there. They did not let that go unnoticed and raise the alarm bells. And now, who knows what the board is going to decide to do? But they've delayed a vote on it. They know
Yep.
that people are watching.
And that's why I'm so glad you're doing what you're doing for Spalding County. Because Spalding County has a much higher population than Lincolnton, but still a lot of people aren't engaged, and especially statewide and nationally, people don't know about us. But when you put the heat on them, it's going to help. And so that's why journalists and news outlets covering these things is super important. And with that, I know you've been writing other articles. You recently, it may even have been today or yesterday, released for the Daily Beast about this, and you write your Substack. Do you want to talk about any other articles that you're working on or have put out involving Spalding County or anything else, really?
I would just say that I don't think, I'm going to continue to pay attention to events in Spalding County. I mean, obviously that is what kind of got me into reporting on this, but basically at this point, like, I'm going to be, because of all the things that I've found in Spalding County and elsewhere, I think I'm going to be spending a lot of time and writing a lot about what folks are doing in government positions regarding election rules and administration in the coming months, because it's not just 2022. What we're seeing across the country is Republicans laying the groundwork for what they perhaps would like to do in 2024 in the presidential, right? So like 2022, like people don't really pay attention to midterms as much. There's no presidential election, so but in terms of not just in terms of being comprised of who is running in your local elections, which is obviously important, but in terms of what these government bodies are doing regarding the administration of elections, that's something that I'm going to be focused on going forward, because 2022 is practice for 2024.
Yes.
And Republicans in Georgia taking over county election boards and changing rules, and I mean that's just the tip of the iceberg. You got 21 people who are election deniers for 2020. You got 21 of those people. It could be as crazy as Ben Johnson, for all we know, running to be secretaries of state in 21 different states.
Yep.
So what's happening in Spalding County is just a tiny little fragment of the bigger national picture. But that being said, I would say that I'm going to keep focusing on this in Spalding County and in Georgia, because I think there's a lot of moving parts, and I think there's a lot that's going to be happening.
Yeah, I mean, I fully think Georgia is a testing ground for this kind of thing, and Spalding County might even be a testing ground within that, right?
Yeah, it may very well be.
My final question, and I want to save it for the end because it doesn't really matter that much, but in your Guardian article, you say that James Newland is of Cherokee descent, by his own words. Do you believe that? Because there's the white myth of a Cherokee grandmother. That's usually a myth.
All I'll say is that Jim got very sort of up in arms when he said, I want you to make sure that you tell people that I'm not just a white person and that I'm of Cherokee descent. And he described, ancestors, going through hardships. And frankly, I was taken aback by how vociferous he was in bringing this up, and I just didn't see it coming. I mean, I'm not going to call into question his racial background. I will say though that it seems like a lot of people who I used to live in northern Minnesota in a town called Bemidji that was surrounded by 3 reservations of Ojibwe Native Americans.
Yeah.
Leech Lake, Cass Lake, and Red Lake, and had a high Native American population. I had friends in that community still to this day. I did extensive reporting in that community. I will say that I won't question his racial background, but I will say that it does seem interesting that a lot of people who look nothing like the Native Americans that I know in my personal life, whenever they say claim Indian and Native ancestry, it always seems to be Cherokee.
Yes.
I don't know what that is.
That's the thing. And Georgia was not home to many Cherokee people. We were mostly Muskogee and Wale, right? So, and there's no reservations here either. Like they were all pushed out to either Florida or out west to Oklahoma as well. And so that's why I call it into question and bring it up at all, is a lot of times white people will say that they're indigenous when they're not, or if they are, it's by such a small amount that it doesn't, like they didn't know any of their ancestors that were like actually indigenous, and they use it as a way to excuse racism.
Well, and somebody pointed out to me, they're like, well, okay, if the judges who selected you had wanted you because you were white or whiter, your nativeness has nothing to do with anti-black sentiment, possible anti-black sentiment by the judges who chose the fifth and deciding member of the Board of Elections.
Right, because Griffin is, even though Spalding County is majority white, Griffin is majority black, and black sentiment, like you're pointing out, runs through all cultures, including black culture. Like anti-black sentiment is a huge part of just generally American culture, and no matter if he's half Cherokee, like you're saying, I don't think that impacts how he's going to change voting laws like Sunday voting that specifically and historically affect black voters.
I mean, he's essentially saying is like, well, there couldn't have been any racism involved or any black sentiment involved with choosing me because I'm whatever, like 1/16 Cherokee. And it's like, that's like saying, oh, I can't be racist because I have black friends.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I brought it up, is it seems like an excuse.
Yeah, it was. I didn't see it coming for sure. I told him, look, I respect Native Americans. I have friends in the I've reported extensively there, but yeah, I will say though that Jim Newman doesn't really want to talk to me though about any of this. So, I'll leave people to come to their own conclusions on that.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on, Justin.
Sure.
You want to shout out any of your social media where people can find you? Or
yeah, just at Justin Glawe on Twitter, Instagram. I guess I do a little bit of stuff occasionally, and then my newsletter is Justin Glawe. Just look up Justin Glawe Substack, and people can find it if they want to sign up for it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the work you do and coming on the pod.
My pleasure. Good talking to you. I'll see you soon.
Yep, see you. Thank you so much for watching this podcast. If you want to support what we're doing, leave a like, comment, subscribe, add your favorites playlist, share with your friends, and you can support me on Patreon, patreon.com/Xenerock. For $5 a month, you can get on my Discord server. For $15 a month, you can be shouted out right here at the beginning of the podcast. So please check that out. Donate if you can. Become a patron. It would really help me out as a community organizer. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great rest of your day.